Hi, welcome back to Hydroponics Daily. Today we're talking about CO₂ enrichment. So plants will photosynthesize more the more CO₂ you give them. At the moment, the background levels of ambient CO₂ in the atmosphere is 426 parts per million. It used to be a lot lower. With human activity, this is risen and is rising still, but it's still not at the level that's optimum for plants. Normally, when you're in a greenhouse or in a grow room, you're raising that level to 1,000 parts per million. So this is something you don't do when you're a beginner grower. It's only something you do once you really want to push yield to its maximum and where you know it's going to be best used. There's no point doing this if you've not got everything else in your grow room or your greenhouse dialed in and perfect, because there'll be something else that's limited in growth. You need to really have optimum lighting conditions, optimum temperatures and things like this. But when you do it, it will super boost growth. And the other reason you might do it is that when you increase the CO₂ levels in the grow room, it increases the plant's tolerance to heat stress. So in the summer, lots of people put CO₂ into their grow rooms to reduce heat stress when there's a very bad heat wave. Now, we go to 1,000 ppm. That's used to be say triple, I'd probably say double now. And you can do that via a number of different methods. You can use canisters, burners, fermenters, or bicarb. In large-scale greenhouses, they use burners. And it's thought that they go to 1,000 ppm because after that, you start to get toxic effects of the nitrogen oxides in the combustion, in the flue gas. Easy for me to say, flue gas. And then also return on investment starts to decrease. So 1,000 being the optimum economically. Obviously that'll depend on the price of gas and the price of your crop. Canisters is just pure CO₂ that's released using a regulator. There are a couple of disadvantages of canisters is that they can freeze up. The regulators can freeze up if you're running a lot of CO₂ through them. They're very heavy to move around, and they're expensive for the amount of CO₂ that you've got compared to burners. The major disadvantage of burners is obviously the fire risk. And if you're in a grow room, an indoor domestic situation, I wouldn't advise using a burner unless you really know what you're doing. They can get knocked over. And you always think, well, I'm not going to knock it over. But we always think we're not going to make mistakes until we do. And so that's a big issue. They can release moisture increase the humidity, and they increase the temperature as well. So if you've read in the CO₂ to mitigate the effects of heat stress, this one's going to add heat to the system. So probably not the best situation there. Fermenters, that's where you get carbohydrates, sugars, and add them to like a yeast or a fungus, and then that releases CO₂. And there's a lot of those sort of ready-packed systems on the market. You can buy them from grow shops. They're not my favourite. They tend to be a bit smelly, a lot of them as well. Some of them have pumps to push oxygen into the system to create the CO₂. Others don't have a pump. Another option is to use bicarb, so sodium bicarbonate, and add citric acid to it, and that releases CO₂. And you can now get controlled systems to monitor the amount of CO₂ that's being released, or to do it in a controlled environment. It's probably the best option if you're a small scale grower, and you can buy CO₂ meters now fairly cheap online and or from your grow shop, and you can use that to sort of gauge how much bicarb and citric to add. So being your own regulator, almost like a manual regulator. If you use potassium bicarbonate and citric acid, then the produce of that, potassium citrates, you could use as a fertilizer. So rather than just dumping the sludge that you get at the end, you actually get two products from it, CO₂ and potassium citrate, which would be a useful fertilizer really at the end of the day, especially for hydroponic crops. You could also have a little cat or a guinea pig in your grow room and feed it some food, and that will release some CO₂. You could be in the grow room yourself and release CO₂, just like King Charles. He talks to his plants. Talk to my plants now. I'm giving them CO₂. So that's another option. I've got a three-legged, one-eyed cat. He used to chill out in my grow room when I have a grow room at home. I don't have a grow room at home anymore. But yeah, he used to release a bit of CO₂. So there's a number of methods. As I say, you want to get to 1,000 ppm, that's your ideal. and you'll super boost your growth if everything else is dialed in your grow room. And that's been Hydroponics Daily for today.